So welcome back to DHamDIY. In the following video, I'm going to be showing you the full process of a transom repair. Now this is going to be a continuation of the boat restoration series, and this was a rather large project. In the video, it's going to be it's going to seem a lot easier than it was. And so that's something I want you to keep in mind when you're watching. This was a very, very big process. So you just saw me going ahead and marking out where I'm going to remove this transom skin. You can choose to keep the fiberglass skin if you want. You can always just put a new one on, right? We'll show you a little bit about that with the fiberglass later. But I decided to keep the skin. The skin was in all right shape, and I figured it would save me a lot of time and effort just keeping that skin. So you saw me marking it out, leaving a lip on all sides, really where there was fiberglass. This makes it easier to tie in the new fiberglass back into the skin when you put your plywood in there. So you can see here just how absolutely nasty that plywood was inside of this boat. It was just about hollow in the middle due to how this boat was, I believe, 92 model, so it had been sitting in there rotten for quite some time, which makes it easier. The more rotten your transom is, the easier it is, because taking out the wood is actually one of the hardest parts. If that plywood is in good shape, you can see in the corners, the top left hand corner and the top right hand corner, those are definitely a lot more trouble to get out of there. But you can see you're just scraping out that rotten, might as well be dirt at this point. They actually make a really nice tool that you can use where it's kind of like just a chisel. You can put it on your Sawzall and then get up in there and save you a whole bunch of time. When you're removing that wood, it's fairly easy to remove it everywhere except inside of that lip. And I just was kind of doing the best I could. It took a very long time getting all that wood out of there. And I've seen some people even using all kinds of different tools for getting that stuff out. But I found just a pry bar and maybe an oscillating tool that you'll see here in shortly. That seemed to be the best way to go about it. Just taking it chunk by chunk, board by board, and getting at it like that. So you can see just getting that oscillating tool in there. And I found it really easy to use that oscillating tool because you can get up flush against it. It's one of the only tools you can really do that with, and it doesn't spin and shoot fiberglass everywhere. So if you're wanting to cut out the transom skin or anything like that, anything related to fiberglass, the oscillating tool is always a really good way to go. So you can see just making a template out of cardboard, getting ready to cut that plywood, but wanting to make sure the fitment's nice. And there might have been maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch gap at the bottom and all sides of the skin, but that's okay, as long as we do the best we can with it. And I was actually surprised too, towards the end of the project, just how much you can get away with in terms of repairing a boat transom. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm sure there's a lot of you who will go into this project wanting to be a perfectionist, right? Wanting to do everything perfect, and then as you get further down into the process, you'll realize, okay, maybe I can cut some corners a little bit. You start to get pretty tired. Cutting out the plywood with a router might not seem like the smartest thing, but I just gotten this router, and one, I didn't have a jigsaw with me or anything like that. Two, I was wanting to try out my new router, and it was really dogging through that material like a champ. It's gonna actually be I believe 3/4 inch plywood. So you can see here there's actually 2 layers of plywood in this transom. There's sort of an area where the motor mount is. That's going to be 3/4 inch. And then once you put that in there, you can put the second layer that you saw me cutting out in there. And it was a lot of just plug and play, just seeing what works. You can see I finally got that fitment right, had to cut off a little bit from the bottom. And alright, just checking to make sure it's looking good. Now, I might use the term epoxy a lot in this video, but really you're supposed to be using a polyester resin. It's a lot better for making a boat. It's not as strong as epoxy, but your gel coat will bind to polyester resin way better. So it's just what everybody uses for boats, and if you hear me make the mistake of saying epoxy, I'm talking about polyester resin. So you can see me here with a stick, just kind of spreading it out like jam on some toast or something. You're going to go through a lot of epoxy as well, or polyester resin. You're going to go through a whole lot of it during the project. I ended up buying a 5-gallon bucket of it for maybe $100, $200, and I used probably about a third to half of it. And I was being very liberal with it, of course. I always tried to just get half of the material painted onto the back skin of the boat, and then I'd get the plywood, wet it down, and then stick it in there. You can see here I just screwed the skin to that plywood, get it to have a real nice solid fit on there, and then once it was dry, just cut off those bolts and leave the bolts in there. They were being drilled into the resin, so the reality of leaks or anything causing any rot, of course, that risk is there, but it's pretty low. So you could leave a lot smaller of a lip of skin around this transom. You could maybe do 2 inches. I believe I did 4 inches in some spots, and it really just made it so difficult to put that plywood in there. And that's why I didn't end up painting this plywood with the polyester resin or the skin with polyester resin before putting the plywood in there. This probably took about an hour or something, and by then the polyester resin would have been already, partially to, if not all the way cured. So, I didn't want to do that. What I did, and this might be a little bit controversial, I pipe bagged in the polyester resin through holes wherever I could find them, and then I cut some in the skin behind this this transom plywood. And you'll see me do that here in a minute. And what that did is, I just pipe bagged it in as much as I could, just filled up any gaps or anything I saw where it was dry, and then after that I would screw that skin to that plywood. As you can see here, just putting as much of it where I can or whatever. And then I also got screws, and on top of screwing the skin to the plywood, I also screwed the 2 pieces of plywood together. And you'll see that gap in the middle, obviously, which might be concerning to some, but you got to keep in mind there was a whole lot of screws that I put into that that are locking those 2 different pieces together on top of the polyester resin, locking them together. And this isn't marine grade plywood either, to the shock of some, but all the marine grade plywood really does is just it essentially has better binding between the layers. It has a special glue that's rated for marine use. It's hard to find. It's super expensive, and I just didn't see the need to do it. But you can even use maybe Kusa board if you see so fit. You can also see me here with the polyester resin, mixing it with the Aerosil Carbosil. It's like aerogel powder, and it thickens up the polyester resin, so you could put it in places like those cracks and gaps, and just filling it in, sort of like you would a putty or something like that. Because polyester resin obviously is very liquid and fluid, and it's difficult to get into things like that and have it stick. So yeah, you can also buy that. I purchased everything from U.S. Composites. They had everything I needed, and yeah, it worked out real well. Spent maybe $300 and didn't use all the materials at all. So if there's any more boat projects down the road, I'll have what I need to take care of it. You can see me here now, just grinding off all those screws. You could back them out, but then you got holes everywhere. I figured, hey, just best to leave them in there. And like I said earlier, you go into the project being a perfectionist, and then you slowly just start cutting corners to see the project get finished, because I very well could have just gave up halfway and and not, finish this up. So here I am painting on that polyester resin, getting ready for the skin to be put on, and I also painted it onto the skin as well. I believe I had it on the floor where you couldn't quite see what I was doing, but yeah, just filling in all the gaps and everything and setting that skin on. The bottom of the skin as well, you can see, is in pretty bad shape, but everything else was really nice, and I was careful enough when I was taking the skin off to not, tear it up too bad. I got that Airseal Carbosil, that thick polyester resin gel. I'm just putting in, all the gaps and everything. I really liked the idea of filling in, everything that I could when I was mixing it, because it is kind of a pain to mix all this polyester resin. And by the time it, you got to use it quick and dry it and all that. So you'll see me just maybe putting that resin where I'm going to have to obviously grind it down later. So you can see there the lip skin was actually sticking up, higher than it should have, because I didn't remove all the old plywood in there. I really couldn't get to it. So, I did end up having to cut a piece of that lip skin off, and you can see there the crack. I did pretty good with the coverage of the plywood, but I'm going to go ahead and fill it in with some more of that gel, and then yeah, just make sure there's obviously not any gaps in there, and that's going to help out with the structural integrity of the transom. Filling it in and putting polyester, and then once I removed that plywood, and then I also removed the plywood sticking to the skin, just went ahead and screwed it back in there, let it dry, and then I'm going to, when I grind down everything to mend the two pieces of plywood together, I'm just gonna do the best I can in that area, right? And there isn't a whole lot of structural integrity either coming from that side. Um, Being the motor I have on it, the boat was rated for a 110 horsepower motor, but I only have a 75 horsepower motor on it, so it's really not pushing the transom to its full, capabilities. If you hung a 110 horsepower motor on it, I'm not, I don't know if the transom would hold or not, but it seemed to be holding just fine with 75 horsepower motor. And you're going to see that later in the next few episodes of this boat restoration series. So there's going to be a whole lot of sanding during this project, a whole lot of itching, and a whole lot of wearing masks. Pretty much everything you do with this transom repair, you're going to need a mask for. Whether it's, sanding down the paint on it, sanding down the fiberglass on it, sanding down, cutting plywood that's been chemically treated, um, it, or smelling the fumes of epoxy, having one of those P.95 masks, is really going to help you out from getting, COPD or something like that. Yeah, the finish, I wasn't really too stressed out about getting a good finish. Um, I didn't know if the transom was going to hold at the time of doing this, because I'd never obviously done a transom before. Not many people have. But, yeah, I didn't want to stress out too much about getting a perfect finish and spraying it with paint and everything. So you'll see a little bit more about that here in a little while. But yeah, I'm just grinding out, maybe a 3 or 4 inch space between between those two different layers, where I can then come in and tie it in with 3 layers of fiberglass and polyester resin. So this is the part that took a really long time and was just a dust monster. It created so much dust. And then after you're done grinding everything out, anywhere there's a crack, anywhere there's a split, you just have to grind it out, about 3 inches around. I'm getting some, I believe, methanol, some solvent, and just gumming up that polyester, that fiberglass, because that's been sitting there since '92. No one's been opening that up, and if you want to adhere properly, you're gonna have to, just put a little solvent on there. It should tack up the polyester resin, make it a little sticky, and make it easier to, you'll get a better adherence. Now we're just painting it on. We're going fast. We got a lot of work, a lot of ground to cover, you know. And you know, cutting the polyester, cutting the fiberglass into strips was a really way to go about it. Just the approximate size that you got a polyester, and that was working pretty good. It's going to be a very messy job. You're going to get polyester everywhere. I would tape up, you know, your trailer if your boat's still sitting on your trailer. Tape up the ground under you, because you just have to. I mean, you might as well be slinging polyester resin onto that fiberglass to get it to fully saturate. That was a problem I had, you know, with this stupid little brush I had trying to get that all to work. I've even seen some people dipping their fiberglass into the polyester resin and then slapping it on. That would probably honestly be a faster way to do it, but it would be a very, very messy situation. I'm at least here. I can kind of control, you know, how much polyester resin is going on. You can see here just different angle of attack. And that was a really big, you know, hole in the fiberglass skin where I really had to just layer it on like crazy. Up here as well, there was a part in, you know, in the top of that transom, uh, you know, motor mount plate where we had some cracks. So um, going ahead and just putting a little bit of fiberglass on that as well, and then we can from there, you know, use that polyester gel with aerosol carbosil to fill in any of the low spots. So now I'm just knocking off all the excess fiberglass, just knocking off anything I can. Using maybe 40, 60 grit sandpaper. It's working fine. Um, having the capability of using air tools during this project too is going to be very important. You know, you really have that high RPM, and you know you can run a big massive tool to get in there. And I believe there's something called like a whirly board or something like that you can use, but I found, you know, just a little 6-inch, 8-inch sanding disc, you know, worked fine. So there I was getting that aerosol carbosil and filling in any low spots on the transom. Also going into the boat right on the backside where that skin is, and filling in any spots you see where I cut open to pump that polyester resin in there, and any previous holes or whatever from you know, the last time the boat was all hooked up. A lot of just weird holes and you know, weird cracks, and you can see how many screws are still in the boat holding that skin to that plywood. I call it extra rigidity. You know, some people might call it a way for water to get into the transom. You know, so I did the best I could with the polyester resin, and then I'm also adding just a little bit of Bondo to fill in any, you know, minor divots or cracks. The Bondo works really well, obviously, as many of you know, for automobiles and things like that, where water isn't an issue. I'd probably recommend you don't use Bondo, but you know, a lot of people have done it on transoms just for the paint, just purely aesthetic, no structural purpose at all. And the way I applied the paint, I wasn't really worried about messing up the paint. I mean, I rolled it on with a roller. You're going to see here in a minute. So yeah, just got that Bondo in there. You know, filled in any spots that were low or cracked up. I wanted to, you know, make it look nice without spending too much time on it. So, you know, Bondo was the perfect way to do that. And you can sand it, you know, maybe 20 minutes after applying it, versus polyester resin, you got to wait a whole day. You might have to wait a whole 24 hours in order to sand your polyester resin. So if you're trying to make a time crunch on your project, this is a good way to do it, where you can sand it, put more on, sand it, put more on, and not have to worry too much about, you know, not have to worry too much about spending a whole week just doing, you know, the aesthetics of it. And you can see here too, once it's all sanded out and done, there's very little Bondo even left. It's just, you know, some minor little spots. All right, so after that, you can see we got a pretty flat. We got a pretty flat transom, and yeah, you know, I'm just taping it up the sides. I'm using a US Composites gel coat. Now, this gel coat is very goopy and sticky, and really wants to gum up on the foam roller, and you'll see the first layer came out very smooth. I'm putting on a really thick first layer. It came out awesome. The second layer, it starts building up on the previous abnormalities of the first layer, and then the third layer, it's building up even more on those abnormalities. So when you start out, you have a really, nice finish, and you could probably get away with just doing one thick coat and leaving it. But, I obviously wanted a big layer of, scratch resistance, keeping anything from, really tearing into the boat, where I can just sand it down and repaint it if I have to. And like I said, I wasn't too certain that this transom would hold. Of course, now obviously I know that, and can assure you this transom's held very well, especially putting the motor on. You'll see that in the coming videos. Just paint it up. I ended up painting up as well, higher on the transom, in that little bay where the motor goes. Painted all that too, and I think it ended up turning out pretty darn good. Stay tuned for the rest of the boat restoration series as well. You're going to see a whole lot of stuff, from working with the fuel pump to messing with the throttle cables. And then we'll go ahead and
Okay, so we've just finished putting on the third coat. Now, the third coat, we added some surfacing wax to the gel coat, and what it does, I think, is either makes it easier to wax and buff out, or if you're gonna add wax to it, it'll adhere properly or something like that. So yeah, we had to add that to the finishing coat. It's gonna give it a nice shine, and it does look pretty nice. We have a lot of the ripples, I guess, for using a foam roller rather than spraying it, but you can always just spray it if you want to get a nicer finish. I didn't know if, once putting the motor on, if this is gonna stick or not, right? If this isn't going to work properly, I didn't want to rip up the finish and have a big crack right here, and then have to go and put a real nice paint, just redo all the paint, because the paint takes a lot of work. So I figured right now it'll be all right, and then yeah, we'll see. We'll hang the motor on, see if it's sturdy, and then maybe we'll think about repainting it. But for right now, it'll work. We need to get it out in the water.